There's a new rumor suggesting Sony could be working on a PlayStation Portal Pro. Not the next gen PlayStation 6 handheld, but an upgraded version of the Portal we already have. And that's interesting because when the Portal launched, it got absolutely hammered. Most people wrote it off straight away, but after the success of the Portal and the updates Sony has rolled out to it, a Pro version suddenly doesn't sound crazy at all. So let's talk about the rumour and what Sony would actually need to upgrade to make a Portal Pro worth it. So let's get straight into the rumour. And here it is here over on Twitter from Zube Tech, who, if you have followed, just posts loads of stuff on their page, all gaming stuff, and it's total hit or miss whether it becomes reality or not. So take this with a pinch of salt. But they are mentioning we are looking to receive a refreshed PlayStation Portal. And they call out two specific things here, which are really cool and exciting. And one is the OLED screen, which I think a lot of people would love to have on their PlayStation Portal. That would give you, deeper blacks, more vivid colors, and it actually helps with battery life. So way more power efficient. So you get more battery life and more game time on your PlayStation Portal, which is a win-win. And where it gets interesting next, though, is I guess we should also mention that if it has an OLED screen, I think the chances of HDR support probably go up through the roof, which would be nice. HDR support on the Portal would be a nice upgrade, especially if it's a Portal Pro, and it would make the games really pop without, killing the battery life. And then next up, they mention 120 hertz display. Now, this higher refresh rate screen is really interesting because currently it's capped, at 60 FPS. And one thing to bear in mind, Sony would need to update the bitrate that the device could receive and what their servers are putting out to take advantage. If it was going to be high refresh rate, like 120 frames per second gameplay. I know Nvidia does that just now with their GeForce Now service and the technology they offer. So it is something that could happen. But even if the games stay capped at 60 frames per second, this higher refresh rate panel can like roughly half the perceived input latency. I remember watching a video on this way back on YouTube. I can't remember who it was by. It was maybe Gamers Nexus or something like that. So it could benefit, you know, gameplay on the device if it still is 60 FPS. And this also would then, make inputs feel a lot tighter, cleaner motion, less kind of smearing and motion blur and stuff like that. So that would be a big win for the device if that was to happen. Also, it probably wouldn't be top of my wish list for a PlayStation Portal Pro though. 120 hertz gaming. I think if you get 60 on this, it looks great. It's pretty good. And high refresh rate gameplay. I know there's some benefits there I mentioned of the high refresh rate panel if that does happen. But a lot of the time, people are wanting high refresh rate because they're playing like, intense first person shooter games competitively, which is just something I don't recommend you do on the PlayStation Portal. If this Portal Pro does come to life though, what would I want to see from a Portal Pro, to make it worthwhile buying? Obviously, we've got the things we mentioned. So OLED screen, yep, that would definitely be on my list. The 120 hertz display, that would just be, I guess, a nice to have, which would be cool. For me, one of the big upgrades I would love to see would be swappable thumbsticks, just like the DualSense Edge has, just the same style of thumbsticks. It could even be the exact same ones, where they're just little modules which just click in and out. Makes sense on a premium model, and also it just avoids the dreaded, stick drift. If you get it on your PlayStation Portal, you can then just change the sticks instead of your whole device, either needing like taken apart or just, scrapped because it's knackered and you can't play your games anymore. So that would be a big one for me. The next one I would like to see is another thing we'd be stealing from the PlayStation DualSense Edge controller, and that would be back buttons. Imagine back buttons on a PlayStation Portal. I just think they're great to have on all controllers. I feel that should just be standard now in this day and age because once you play a game with back buttons, It is really difficult to go back to not using them. So that would be a big one for me, especially if you do play. I know I didn't recommend FPS games for the Portal, but FPS games like single player games are totally fine on it. That would be a big win for the back buttons. It just really helps with accuracy and stuff like that because you don't need to take your fingers off the sticks. You can, activate your commands and press the buttons just using the back buttons without having to use the face buttons all the time. So that would be awesome. I would like to see that big time. Next one, I guess, would probably be the most important one, and that would be upgrading the Wi Fi on the PlayStation Portal. Currently, it is Wi Fi 5. That is the chip that's on board. Even when it launched, I'm pretty sure we were up to Wi Fi 6 and Wi Fi 6E. Now Wi Fi 7 is available. Imagine it launched with Wi Fi 7. It just could make a big difference because this is a streaming device. It absolutely lives and dies by, the connection stability and the ability to actually have a connection with your router or with whatever Wi-Fi you're using. I think that would be a big win, and it would just make the device more stable for a lot of people that are having problems with, maybe connecting to their network or when they're out and about. Especially if you upgraded your modem and your router to be Wi-Fi 7, it would just make a big, big difference. I think that would be a really good one for the PlayStation Portal Pro to have for sure. And I'm going through these, what I think would be great to have. Let me know in the comments. Leave a comment what the update you would love to see on the PlayStation Portal Pro would be. Sound off in the comments and let me know if you'd be interested in this at all, or are you just not interested? You're just happy with your current Portal, or you just don't like Portal at all. Let me know in the comments. I love to hear and I love to chat to you all. Next up, I think it would be cool, maybe a bit of a UI update. If there's more powerful hardware in here, so maybe a more powerful system on a chip, which would hopefully allow for, higher bitrate gameplay and stuff like that. Imagine you could then get some apps on the device, some optional maybe media apps, your YouTube, Netflix, Spotify, not like the full App Store ecosystem that you get, on the console or on like your mobile phones, for example, but just something, it would just take that device up a little level, especially, if it is a pro device. It would be cool if you could do things like that. You could then be listening to your music on Spotify while you're playing your games, just things like that, Discord, things like that. I think that would be a nice update for, your daily use using a PlayStation Portal Pro. Now, the next thing on my wish list is not actually a performance update, but it's something I'd love to see, and that is just a bit of a new design in terms of new colorways being offered. I'm pretty sure they'll offer the standard white and black models as they always do. But I would love to see some translucent plastic shells appearing for the PlayStation Portal or the PlayStation Portal Pro. I just think it would look amazing. One of my favorite looking consoles of all time is the fantastic N64 from back in the day. The PS2 had some translucent plastic models as well, which were great. But look at this fantastic N64 with the translucent purple. I would love to have a PlayStation in that colorway, and the PlayStation Portal Pro 100%. That would be really cool. Just something to make it stand out and look different from the standard Portal, so it's the Pro model. Obviously, there might be changes with the sticks and stuff like that. The screen, maybe the screen will be a different size. I don't know. I don't think I'd want to change the form factor too much because I do really think this is the most comfortable handheld you can get. The DualSense split in half with the screen is just perfect for long gaming sessions. You actually can't beat that. So that would be my tweak. I'd like to see maybe a little bit of a design change in terms of the colors offered. That would be nice. What color of Portal would you like to see offered? Let me know in the comments. Now, I think this Portal Pro makes a lot of sense right now, given the wider gaming landscape where hardware prices are just going up across the board with this AI, bubble just hoovering up all the RAM and other components. True standalone handhelds and, consoles are probably getting a lot more expensive to build right now. We don't know what's happening with the PlayStation 6. The PlayStation 6 handheld, could they possibly be delayed because of these increased and inflated hardware prices, which everyone is experiencing right now? That would mean a PlayStation Portal Pro would be a lot cheaper to produce because it's not, a beefy bit of hardware. There's not going to be a need for a ton of RAM and top of the line hardware. So much cheaper to produce for Sony, and hopefully then a lot cheaper, for us to buy versus the full-on handheld, which right now would probably cost a fortune. I think Sony might hold off on that until prices, stabilize or hopefully come down. And then the PlayStation 6 dedicated handheld does not cost an absolute fortune. Like you see a lot of these PC handhelds that are coming out just now, and they're costing £1,000 or $1,000 plus. I just don't want to pay that for a portable handheld device. It's just wild. So maybe the PlayStation Portal Pro could come in at $50 or $100 more than the standard one. That would be a nice upgrade. I think, premium experience there without the handheld console costs. That could be a smart move by Sony. And also, let's clarify this. This is an additional device. So the Portal Pro would sit alongside the current PlayStation Portal. It wouldn't replace it. Think about it like your PlayStation 5 DualSense controller and the DualSense Edge model. So this could even be the PlayStation Portal Edge model. That would be cool as well. Gives players choice. I think it's quite a low risk move for Sony now because the PlayStation Portal has found its audience. It has been successful. I actually think as well that's why a lot of these features we have mentioned were missing in the first Portal, because it was a bit of a test the waters and a bit of a risk for Sony. I think they really did not know how this was going to go, so they played it safe, and if it was a complete flop and a disaster, hey, they've learned their lesson. But it has been really successful. I think this has been a big part in paving the way for PS6 handheld, or whatever they call it, an actual dedicated handheld, which we know Sony are working on. And it also makes sense for a PlayStation Portal Pro to be in the works. That could be the kind of stopgap in between until we get our hands on new hardware, whenever that is, 2027, 28, 29, maybe even 2030. Who knows how wild this AI bubble slash boom is going to get. So yeah, I think it makes sense, because a lot of people said, oh, this should have had an OLED screen right away. I get that, but Sony was definitely playing it safe with the first version of the Portal. Now it's successful, all bets are off. Who knows what is coming down the pipeline? And the whole Portal Pro idea only works because the Portal itself is in a completely different place now. And I explain exactly why in this next video on screen.